Welcome here, everyone. I am excited that we are finally here at this table. This is episode 1 of the first series and first season of When Love Hurts. I want to start by introducing everyone who is here at this table. So I'm Alison, and this is...
I'm Jo Neal.
And we will be your hosts for this podcast. Beside us, we have the lovely Jill Corey and Karen McAnlis Davis, who are the authors of the impactful book, When Love Hurts, A Woman's Guide to Understanding Abuse in Relationships, as well as the Best Practice Guide or a Best Practice Guide and curriculum for professionals.
Let's pause for a moment and acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Wasanic people on the far west coast of Turtle Island, also known as Canada.
Thank you, Karen. A little disclaimer before we begin. All the stories and examples shared are not specific to any one person. Names and details are changed, yet we know that so many women share similar experiences that they do not need to identify with anyone's story. So, here we are. Why are we here? Why are we so excited and motivated and passionate about this topic? Or what brings us to this table?
We want to have more information available for women and for professionals. For so many decades that Karen and I have done the work, we've heard from women that they don't get the right information from professionals and from friends and family. And so they don't even know how to name their experience. Mm-hmm. So that's really where we start, is what are women's experiences and how do we help them really understand what's happening to them? If you're a woman who's experienced abuse, you may also have felt disappointed or frustrated because you've told somebody about the abuse or told them your experience, and they haven't responded appropriately. Either they've minimized it or called it something that it wasn't. And so we want to help you, first of all, get clarity and help professionals around you use the right language and bring the right framework and understanding. Often women find it very unhelpful to go for help, and that's really hard on our hearts to hear that women have had the courage to sought help and then not got what they needed, and sometimes, in fact, got information or direction or an opinion that made it worse for them. We've seen firsthand how women diligently apply the advice and looking to us for help. So when they get some advice, they try to apply it, and in fact, it can really backfire, make them feel responsible for it, harm them more, make them feel like they're the problem that needs fixing. But when women are given the opportunity to talk about what's happened to them, it can lead to the right support. They begin to make sense of what's happening to them, and they feel less responsible, less crazy, and less alone.
Yeah, women know that there's something wrong. And so they're reading self-help books, they're going to counselors, they're talking to people, and they're not getting helpful advice. And it leaves women feeling alone and confused and that they're to blame, that it's their fault. So we believe that the When Love Hurts approach gives women an accurate way of talking about what has actually happened to them. And when they can describe what's happened to them in their own words and in an accurate way, it helps to lift that fog of confusion. It brings a lot of clarity for women. They're still dealing with the problem of abuse, but there's a lot of clarity about what it is she's dealing with. This podcast that we're so excited to get started on is just a way to make information more readily available to women, and also, just as important, available to professionals, so that they can bring the most helpful lens and approach to supporting women.
I think it's important to pause here and talk about the language that we're going to use, because so often when we talk about abuse, we use language, or it's out there being used as, domestic violence, domestic abuse, interpersonal violence. Family violence is a term that's used here in British Columbia in the court system. Coercive control has become much more of a way of talking about abuse in recent years. High conflict relationships. And one of the issues about all of these ways of talking about abuse is it really doesn't say who is hurting who. So, can we talk about what language do we use and why?
We talk about women experiencing abuse from a partner. We actually like to just use the language of woman abuse. Sometimes it's it's so interesting to us that we can talk about child abuse or elder abuse, but we can't seem to just talk about woman abuse and name it for what it really is. But being clear about who is doing the abusing and who is experiencing the abuse is really important.
Ideas like domestic violence and domestic abuse make it seem like in the household there's kind of a problem going on between them, or like Karen and I sometimes laughingly say, like, the house is abusing itself. And so it's really inaccurate and it's really unhelpful, and it conceals the perpetrator's responsibility.
Yeah.
And similarly with the idea of intimate partner violence, it's like, well, there's nothing intimate about abuse. And how are we putting two words that are so opposite to each other together? And, we recognize that these are all attempts by people to both name the problem, but to soft pedal so we don't hold men too accountable for the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece too, is you hear in the court system the language of high conflict relationships being often used. And that really is like, well, is it really a conflict? No, there's one person dominating another. So it isn't accurately labeling what's going on. And we see that with coercive control. The hope with that language is it is all encompassing, and it can really shift our thinking to this is more than just physical violence. Yet when we say coercive control, it doesn't actually label, or for some women, it isn't actually labeling what they've experienced. So if there's a lot of physical violence and really, or there's a woman being yelled at constantly or being belittled with names constantly, is that language of coercive control accurately naming what she's experiencing?
It certainly is part of abusive men's tactic, is that control. But it doesn't cover the breadth of men's use of abuse, and it doesn't cover women's experience enough. When you expand it to think about financial control, and as you say, like all the verbal abuse, it's different than coercive control. So for sure it's a tactic, but it's not everything. And I think we just really want to make sure we're accurate in our language. And so sometimes we use the idea of women impacted by abuse or women experiencing abuse, but we always have to keep adding by men. Right. So again, it's not the focus on the woman. It's the focus on who is the perpetrator, who's accountable for those actions. And why is this important? Well, for me, it's important because when a woman goes for service and they think it's a high conflict problem, then they're going to be dealing with both people to help them handle conflict differently.
In that language of high conflict, the assumption is that the woman is just as problematic as the man, right? And so women get these very shaming comments from judges, right?
Yeah, and from counselors sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really helpful for us to think both about how you as a woman are experiencing this, but also how professionals have kind of weaponized some of that language against women. They're held way more accountable or responsible for things that they cannot possibly be responsible for.
I think it draws some of the shame away from the women as well.
I love that.
There can be so much shame when we use different types of language, like intimate partner violence or domestic abuse. There's shame that comes with that. And I think when we accurately label it as it is, as women's abuse or women abuse, it's taking some of that shame away.
Yeah. It's placing the accountability where it needs to be with the man who's doing the abusing.
So before we jump too much further into this episode's topic on dominant discourse, which we will explain later, we want you to know a little bit more about how each of us came to do this work and how the four of us came together. How are we all connected? So Jill, why don't you take the lead here?
Well, it's been 4 decades, honestly, since I started doing this work. I began working in a women's shelter when I was a single parent and going to graduate school. And I was struggling as a single parent, and I needed some extra income. And I suddenly found myself in this new world that I had never really been a part of. But I was identifying as a feminist as a scholar. And we were, violence against women sort of fit into that analysis of inequality and oppression. And so the work that we were doing felt like the action around this theoretical idea of feminism for me. And what I learned was that that's where my passion was in action, not just as a scholar. Of course, it's so important for Karen and I that we attach research to what we're doing. And you'll hear over the years how many women we've learned from and asked questions of to really make sure that we're accurate in our understanding. But for me, just seeing how brave women were and how courageous and how unfair, not just her partner, but the system was to women was very motivating for me. And I've passionately worked in this field for nearly 40 years now. For me, it's just really important that we listen to women and that we get our strength from women, because overall the sector can be very discouraging. I just find women so inspiring, and we always also feel so sad that we have to be inspired by their courage, that they need that much courage just to make their ways through all of this. The next thing I did, which I think is really fundamental to what I now understand, is that I worked for almost 10 years in a counseling agency where we were running programs for men who were abusive and support programs. And that's really the foundation of the When Love Hurts material. Beyond the groups that we did, we really witnessed how the system is still really designed to support men, to give men lots of room to tell their story and to see it equally and to become kind of sympathizers. And that is a trend that's followed us for 40 years, that, that we see men as somehow struggling, and we give so much sympathy and room for their story, and yet we're so hard on women. And what we found was that giving women some material and some framework to reinterpret and give voice to their own experience in group is just such a powerful experience. I guess I see my contribution to this field now as thinking about what's out there in the world that are beliefs about men who are abusive and beliefs about women who've experienced abuse, and really helping to bring a stronger, clearer, unbiased perspective. That we are so faced with opinions from everybody all the time about who these women are and why what they're doing to their man is so unfair. It's really important as part of the podcast is to bring the truth forward and to really carry women's stories in a way that's ethical and true and really honors women's experience. And I think that's what's connected all of us, is just a sense of honoring women and their experience.
I came to this work through personal experience. Even when I was just dating Bruce, my now husband, I knew that something was wrong. And the only language I had was that I was getting hurt in the relationship. And so that's why the title of the book, When Love Hurts, because we think that might be the entry point for women, is that they're loving their partners, they're trying to figure it all out, but they're getting hurt. And I would have meant at the time that I'm getting emotionally hurt. And I gave it a lot of thought about who I could talk to about what was going on in my life at the time, and there was no one that I could talk to. Things moved on, we got married. Things got worse, as is often the case as women become more committed in the relationship. There was a particular incident that involved some physical violence, and that was a wake-up call, I think, both for Bruce and I. And I'm really grateful that he was open to friends who held him very accountable and told him he needed to go to a group for men who were abusive. And he did, and he went, and he worked hard over many, many, many weeks. And he was actually the person who first showed me the cycle of abuse that we'll be talking about in coming episodes. And he told me there was a group for women. And I didn't think I would qualify, as is so common, right? Women so often think, oh, I don't know if I qualify for the group. I don't know if it's that bad. But I went to the group, and Jill Corey was one of the facilitators. And the group itself was probably the single most helpful thing I ever did in my life, to be in that group. I was living with Bruce, he was seeking treatment, but he was also continuing to be abusive. And so it's like the world was upside down for the week. And then I would go to group for 2 hours and the world would be turned right side up. And I could tell the truth of what was going on and be affirmed and listened to and believed. And I met other incredible women. So that was just an amazing time in my life. Fast forward a couple of years, and I felt so passionate about wanting to be helpful to other women. Bruce had done the hard work of changing. And so I just felt like I want to share and help other women. And so I approached Jill. I was at the time, I was a pastor. Actually, I approached Jill, went to her office to ask her, can I somehow work in this field or something? Fully expecting her to say, no, this is only for professional counselors or something like that. I was so nervous that day, I remember. But her response was so warm and so encouraging. And she thought, oh, like for a pastor to actually get educated around this topic, you could be so much help to so many women. And so Jill started to train me in how to lead groups specifically. And my congregation freed up time for me to lead those groups, which was amazing. So we started doing groups, and Jill just started teaching me in her living room a couple hours at a time. It wasn't too long after that it became really clear for Jill and I that there was a book that wanted to be written, that we wanted to take all the really helpful information that women could access in the support group and lay it out in sort of a self-help format so that, because we knew not all women can come to the support group, right?
Yeah.
So the book is all the exercises from the support group that women can engage with, as well as always women's lived experiences are so important to us. So throughout the book is woven in women's stories. So we think, we know, hearing from hundreds of women now, that they really relate and connect with the book. And really, and now in a sense, we're taking a really obvious next step with this podcast of like, here's hopefully another way that women can connect and get this really helpful information. As Jill already mentioned, the women's courage and their determination, and it really is the inspiration for all that we do is the women.
Which leads really nicely to how I got involved. I met Karen in January of 2016 when I very nervously showed up for a counselling appointment. I had been wondering what on earth was wrong in my relationship for many years. And then I had confided in someone who had put me on to the When Love Hurts website. And through there, I had contacted Karen for counselling. I met with her and she just there was no surprise. I remember, I just told you my story and you were like, you were kind and helpful, but you weren't shocked, that was telling, It began this journey for me of understanding, I am being subject to abuse. That's what this is. It's common. Many, many other women are going through this. And then you invited me to a group. I went along and I remember not being sure about whether it was going to be, was I going to fit in? But that group, like you say, the turning things the right way up, that's exactly what group did for me. I had I had nowhere else where I could go to talk about what was happening. And once a week, I was able to share openly and honestly about what was happening and begin to understand what I was going through. From there, I had a fire in my belly then for this issue. I could not believe that I was in this position. I couldn't believe how many other women were in this position. So I decided that I wanted to pursue my goal of becoming a counsellor, which I had put on hold for many years, raising a family. And so I went and got my Master's of Counselling, and now I work as a therapist supporting other women. It's like this journey kind of, keeps being, go passed on and passed on and passed on. I'm so excited to be here. Feel very honoured.
And then there's me, last but not least. I met Karen in 2020. So I am the last to join. But when I first reached out to Karen, I was in a really dark and difficult season of life and was seeking a counselor who fully understood what I was walking through. I had sought out counseling before, but no one actually labeled what was going on and named what was happening. And Karen was that counselor. She was the first counselor that named the abuse and would go on to help me fully understand and make sense of all that I had and was experiencing. She did this all virtually, which is incredible, as I was 2 provinces away and felt really lost and alone, and trying to find support where I was felt next to impossible.
Yeah.
So over the next year, like Job mentioned, I decided to pursue a Master's of Counseling Psychology because that fire in my belly. So during this time, I continued to learn all about abuse and the realities of living in abuse, escaping abuse, and continuing to experience abuse post-separation and divorce. I heard many other victim and survivor stories, and something that continued to ring in my ears was resilience and the need for greater support and advocacy. It's truly a silent epidemic, as the World Health Organization has put it. I've become really passionate about this topic and about supporting and advocating for women who are and have experienced abuse. I name the abuse, as Karen did for me, and when I see it and hear others sharing in my counseling office, I want to provide that support and listening ear and consultation and resources to other professionals when they are dealing with the abuse. I long to see change, for common beliefs to be challenged and changed ultimately, for the courts to fully understand, and for the next generation to be given the opportunity to use their voice and be heard.
We've all had such interesting ways of arriving here. Our journeys have been so different. And yet, one thing that holds true for all of us is some core values, some really strong beliefs that we have about the women that we support. I think where we always start is that we listen to, believe, and respect women, that it's so fundamental because women haven't been believed when they've told people. They've been discounted. They've been kind of told that they're exaggerating or overly sensitive. And so we really want to make sure that women feel believed. That, I just can't say enough about that. And, the thing that we know for sure is that women hold the dominant discourse, like the big beliefs that women have are beliefs that we all hold about what's wrong with women. And so when they come to us, they are often telling us that there's something wrong with them, that they're overly anxious, that they have lessons to learn, that they chose an abuser because they're trying to understand something. But our job is to listen to women in that way and know that there's another explanation and help women by believing her about what her experience is, not the way that she's describing it, because that's being handed to her from people who don't understand.
Yeah, I'd say another really important value is the value of women connecting with each other and hearing each other's voices and not being alone. And we know it's true for all of us. We heal in community, not in isolation. And part of the impact of abuse is women get isolated. So whether it's coming to a group, connecting with other women, listening to this podcast, we believe that when women get to connect with each other, that some really important healing can happen. And then just the importance of the right kind of information, not putting the wrong language or the wrong terminology or the wrong understanding on it, but some really accurate information and tools to make sense of a very confusing experience, right?
So really, this podcast begins where our work with women impacted by abuse and with professionals begin, examining and deconstructing the commonly held beliefs about male violence. We call these beliefs the dominant discourse, and you've heard us say that language a little bit. So Jill, can you say a little bit about what you mean when you use the term dominant discourse?
Yeah, absolutely. Dominant discourses about men's abuse are the prevailing, like the big ideas about who's responsible, who caused the problem. Yeah. And they're the ones that override or win out over women's stories of abuse. They dominate the conversations, but they also dominate the way that professionals think and act and respond to abuse. When we go to self-help books and when we go to counselors, it's like there's a frame that they're using that dominates. And we know that these dominant discourses are wrong. And we're going to talk a lot more about why they're wrong, but they do not describe the realities of male violence. They do not describe women's voice and experience. And so we need to start there. For 40 years in my work, we've always started with what we call the myths about abuse, but really they're more than myths. They're these big, big ideas that really control the narrative.
Yeah, and they're really called dominant because they dominate, right? And they win out over women's voices and experiences. And we're wanting to bring forward women's real lived experiences, which are actually run counter to the dominant discourse.
Right. Yeah. Really, it's like everyone has an opinion about this, right? Like it's that Uber driver who you pick up a conversation with and then they all of a sudden are telling you why women return to an abuser. Or it's being told by a child protection worker that a woman isn't actually protecting her child by staying in a relationship. Everyone has an opinion or a thought that they want to add.
Yeah. And isn't it so interesting? Because I don't think everyone has an opinion about how to fly a jet, right? And part of it is that kind of minimizing of women's lived experience that everybody thinks they know, and everybody thinks they know what a woman should do. But
And what they would do.
Right.
Yeah.
They think what they
Yeah.
would do in that situation. But if you haven't walked a mile in a woman's shoes in this situation, you don't actually know. So
Really serves to silence her, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So there's so many ways that this dominant discourse or these dominant discourses can show up. So one of the dominant discourses asks, or the dominant discourse asks us, why does she stay? Why is she attracted to abuse? What's the accurate way we would actually think about that?
I mean, I think that is the number one thing that people kind of question, and they think to themselves, I wouldn't stay. That's often what we hear is, if that happened to me, I would be out of there immediately.
Yeah.
And I think the message that we all want to convey here is that it's complicated and it's high risk. And both of those are true, and that there isn't a good solution. Staying means that she's allowed a little bit more room to protect her children. And that's one of the reasons to stay. Financially, she may be very vulnerable if she leaves. And we know the discrepancy or the gap when women leave is that they drop way down in terms of poverty. And men in general, but abusers get lots of, like, they're kind of favored economically. And so there are more complicated reasons for staying. She's still hopeful that something's going to change because he keeps making the promise, and other people that are around her, her faith community, her counselor, are kind of giving her messages that if she works on something, the relationship is going to improve. So the why does she stay is such a simple question, and it's so complicated. And we can never forget the risk. More women are murdered once they leave a relationship than when they stay in their relationship.
Yeah.
And I think these days, maybe the most profound thing that happens to women when they separate is they don't get to parent their children half the time, and they're forced to send their kids to be with their abuser 50% of the time.
someone they're afraid of, someone they know is dangerous, but they have to hand their children over. So women are trapped in lots of ways. And Alison, I think you named another important dominant discourse there too of why did she choose an abuser, right? That people think that she chose poorly, and we don't think that at all. And when you actually listen to women's lived experiences, he presented himself in a certain way, in a positive way, in a way like a normal person, a non-abusive person would present themselves. And that's what she chose, right? But there is this idea that somehow she chose. She chose this, right?
And, if listeners are listening and thinking about this, and if you're wondering whether you're in an abusive relationship, or if you know that you are, we really want you to hear that we know that the reason that you're in that relationship is that your partner presented himself as somebody who shared ideas about relationship with you, who expressed that they valued you and that they valued your choices. And that's what you fell in love with. That's what you were attracted to. You weren't attracted to the abuse.
So more accurate question to be asking, rather than why does she stay, or why is she attracted to the abuser, or what's wrong with her, is to be asking, why does he abuse?
Absolutely.
And put it back to him. Why does he operate from power and control? Why does he stay? Or why are women expected to protect their children and protect themselves when he is the one that's actually putting them at risk versus putting all the onus onto her?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so true.
We ask these questions, but there's this double bind that women get put in. So one, they're saying you should leave because then you're going to be safer. The kids will be safer. Yet when she leaves, then she's going to have to hand her kids over 50% of the time and not be with her kids, with someone that she knows has abused her. And if she stays, she gets to be with them 24/7. So the solution isn't stay or leave, because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Yeah,
exactly. And what about the dominant discourse around abuse being physical? When we talk about abuse, it seems that that's what people understand in their minds. I always feel like I have to explain, oh, actually, for me, it wasn't physical. And then that just seems, what am I talking about? People just don't get it. They don't understand that it's about power and control, and that physical abuse is just one piece. And it even isn't even always there.
Yeah.
Men don't even have to use that.
Yeah.
Because they have all these other tactics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if a man who's abusive has some intelligence, he realizes, oh, there might be consequences, right? If I beat her up or something, throw her against a wall. But he can close bank accounts, he can disappear money, he can turn the children against her, he can call her all kinds of names, and there are no consequences for it. And again, this is really a place where we've learned so much from women, because it's so fascinating doing groups for 25 years. When we would talk about different types of abuse, women never pointed to the physical abuse as being the worst type of abuse.
Right.
They would point to some of those other more covert or difficult to name or nail down types of abuse, and the things that were happening constantly. And in fact, in my 25 years of leading groups, only once did one woman say, you know, for me, the physical abuse was the worst kind of abuse because he had left her with a permanent disability, right? But another woman might say, the financial abuse is the worst because now I'm bankrupt and, you know, I'm not sure I'm going to have housing next month. Or another woman might say, you know, what he did with my relationship with my children was the worst, right?
Yeah.
So we really want to move away from thinking about physical as the worst. And you know, women can die from other things too, right? Like just from the extreme forms of other abuse can cause women to feel suicidal, et cetera, et cetera. So,
You know, that dominant discourse really can prevent women from coming for help, right?
Yes.
Like when we run groups or in counseling sessions, women will say, I don't know if I really belong here because I haven't experienced physical abuse. And so it drives a wedge between a woman and help because they don't think they fit the stereotype of a woman who's experienced physical abuse. And so that dominant discourse really serves to keep women away from the right kind of support as well.
yeah. And, you know, sometimes I think when we're hearing the dominant discourse, some of it is that it comes in as simple solutions, right? Like,
Yes.
she should just,
Yes. Yes.
she should just stand up to him.
Yeah.
She should just have, quote, better boundaries. She should just leave, all those kinds of things. This idea that, oh, if it was so bad, she would leave. But one thing we've really learned is that it is really complex. Jill's already talked about this, but it's both practically complex and emotionally complex. So if I ever think, as a support person, if I ever think, oh, there's a simple solution, why doesn't she just? I know I haven't been listening enough. I need to listen more, and then I will understand the complexity that she's living with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, Karen, is when a woman is sharing, they are the expert in their abuser. And when you are a professional supporting them, you really have no idea the little tiny ways that he's threatening her that one day could actually end up with her being killed. And it's truly her as the expert, not the professional.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And that comment really brings up that earlier idea that we said that in women's own way and in her own voice, that we need to listen to her as the expert and not bring any of our beliefs or biases to that experience, but to just listen carefully. Again, she may rely on the dominant discourse to explain, like she might tell us she has poor boundaries, but what we would hear is that it's not safe for her to put up a boundary. And so that's the shift, but we don't think we're more right. We just believe that she's being handed the wrong way of explaining what's happening.
Because everybody uses the dominant discourse until it's challenged somehow, right? Whether that's challenged by listening to enough women's stories or maybe listening to this podcast or whatever.
Yes.
You know, everybody carries the dominant discourse till something happens that challenges that. I think another really strong part of the dominant discourse is that the woman is partly to blame for the problem, right?
Huge.
What are some examples, would you say? Like how have you heard that expressed, how the woman gets partly to blame? I'm just thinking about how marriage counselors get trained, right? Marriage counselors get trained to assume that both parties are responsible. Both people can bring about change, right? So they'll work with the woman to try to bring about change, even in the context of abuse, unfortunately.
Yeah. I was actually just speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago who's a marriage counselor. We were talking about this topic, and the person was sharing this exact thing. You know, I work with couples. she said, and I help each party to look at what their part is. And I just said, well, I have a different perspective. I believe that the woman doesn't have a part, which is, as I say it to a counsellor, I know that that's almost a shocking statement, right? Because it's so much part of the training. How can that possibly be that she doesn't have a part? And yet it's true, because as we know, the abuse is driven by him. And we know that it doesn't matter what a woman does. He is constantly driving that pattern.
She cannot change that.
She can't do it.
her, but she cannot change the pattern of abuse.
I think of the courts also when a woman, or you're going in to seek out divorce, sometimes the courts will require you to take a training on high conflict relationships, or the impact of a high conflict divorce. Where as soon as you put that language in, we've talked about the language before, but it puts the woman partly to blame in the same context as the man. And even as you say, like, so often all that woman wants to do is change enough so that he will change, or he will look at her differently. But then when she tries all these tools that a marriage counselor gives her, or the courts are giving her, it might actually make the abuse worse. And so often it does. Make the abuse worse, because it can be used then against her.
And this is the problem when we see the relationship as mutual rather than as power over, and really the motivating piece for abusive men is to have power and control. And if we, or service providers, or the legal system brings this idea that everybody has a part and everybody can change the course, then we're really not asking for any accountability from the abuser, and we're not recognizing the extent to which that power and control exists, and how willing he is to go to any length to maintain power and control.
And how that neutrality really serves the abuser, right? Like that, how the system wants to neutralize it and make both parties responsible, really empowers the abuser. That works very well for him. And part of the dominant discourse is this idea that women are just as abusive as men. We find we're constantly pushing back against that. And some of that is because of what we would call poorly done research, very simplistic research, instead of really listening to women's stories and women's experiences.
Yeah, some of the research that has been, in our opinion, flawed because it doesn't center women's experience is just these large-scale surveys where they ask men and women if they've used certain acts, like hitting, kicking, biting, spitting. And sometimes in self-defense, women have used that. But the context is so important here, because the context is self-defense, or at some points maybe retaliating to defend or protect a child. Or, if they're trapped in a room in the house, that they might fling open a door to get out, and in the process he's injured or claims injury. We hear from women all the time that police are called and he runs into the bathroom and splashes his face and gets himself together. And then he looks like he's the guy that is trying to solve the situation. And she's the one who's hysterical and blaming and like out of control. So it's really important for us that we bring the right frame, that we bring this context. And so in the research, when we just ask women and men, have you used these things, it doesn't paint the picture at all of the reality of who's initiating, who's harming who, what the long-term impacts are. I know in the men's treatment program, when men came to the treatment program voluntarily for their abuse, they still always want to say that women, their partners, were equally responsible.
And abusive, right?
And
like they would
abusive,
say their partners
she's
were abusive.
abusive too. And so if a researcher takes at face value, or a clinician takes at face value what he's saying and what she's saying, and they're held with equal importance or merit, which is easy in our culture because of the frame of relationships are equal, then we make a big mistake, and we embolden him to continue to use those tactics of control, and we diminish her experience and what she needs. And that's what the research is doing, is that it covers over the whole context, the dynamics, all the forms of power and control. And so we don't find the mainstream research very helpful for understanding abuse.
I think another point around that is what I think of as the fear factor, right? Like who's afraid,
Right.
who's afraid, and who
Yes.
isn't, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
well as who's initiating and who may be responding. Yeah. And who has choices, right? Who can choose to go out for an evening and not have any consequences, and who doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another dominant discourse is that abuse overall that abuse happens to certain women, right? And we've really come to know that this can happen to any woman, period, full stop, right?
Yeah.
But one of the examples of the certain types of women that this happens to is women who have low self-esteem. But what might we say in response to that? If people are saying, well, I think this just happens to women with low self-esteem.
My immediate thought is just there's so much shame that comes with a woman even coming forward about abuse.
Yeah.
Because some of these dominant discourses are held, right? Like they're being told only certain women are the ones being abused. So then all of a sudden, if you are going to come forward saying you're abused, then you're putting yourself in that category,
Yeah.
even though maybe you are a lawyer, you're a doctor, you are a leader, yet you're in this relationship that leaves you feeling like you're upside down. So I just think of the shame that carries, for it's putting shame on the woman for not coming forward. Yet we know that, I'm sure you guys agree with me, with like half of my clients are high level professionals.
Yeah. Yeah.
That their self-esteem is not an issue in the slightest.
And women often will say that when they met their partner, they were in a position where they were confident and, living a good life. And it's actually it's the impact of the abuse, if anything, that is bringing them down.
Yeah.
It's certainly not that their self-esteem somehow caused him to be abusive.
Yeah.
It's such a bizarre thing to say, really, isn't it?
I love that because it makes it seem so ridiculous to even
Yeah.
theorize in that way, that somehow the self-esteem caused him to be abusive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just linking to that again, I was recently talking to someone they said, oh yeah, well, women who are subject to abuse, it's because they grew up in that environment. So they think it's normal. Right.
That's a really strong part of the dominant discourse.
Yeah.
And I think one of the gifts for Jill and I of having supported many women, over decades, is that, I've met women who have come from, lots of women who have come from above average family homes, right? Like loving, respectful, not perfect, because nobody's family of origin is perfect, but like loving, respectful. Their fathers model beautiful behavior to their mother, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, it leaves the woman feeling like there's something wrong with me. If in fact her story is, okay, well, I did witness abuse in my home, so then therefore somehow I'm damaged and I chose this, right? Instead of, no, you chose somebody who presented himself very well in the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea is like that she thinks it's normal.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just, women don't think that being abused is normal. No. They just don't.
And no man comes up to a woman and says, hi, my name is Nathan and I'm abusive and my ex-wife has a restraining order on me. Do you want to go on a date? Right?
Exactly.
Like, no. Women actually, we're going to get into this so much more, but women know like what is right behavior and what feels good to them and what does not feel okay to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you see that there's like so many consequences for the dominant discourses that are held.
Yeah.
And it goes back to why this is so important. One thing that I continue to hear from all of us is like it's putting women at further risk.
Yeah.
And services are being created to favor the abuse of men and the blaming and harsh stereotypes that are being put on abused women prevent women from seeking help themselves and seeing themselves as being abused and getting the right kind of support. Or they're losing their children or their ability to protect their children.
Yeah.
There's financial devastation, ongoing stalking, they're not being allowed to move. There's so many consequences to the dominant discourse.
Yes. Yeah. Because that's the place where the professionals are operating out of for the most part, right? Whether it's courts or family child protective services or whatever. Yeah.
So sometimes we hear these dominant discourses show up in very kind of subtle ways, like they're like ideas that are floating around in the culture, but to us they're wildly distorted in terms of women's experience, but they've been handed them And so as women try to grapple with what is happening to me, maybe there's a little bit of that idea that makes enough sense to her that she kind of floats it to us to test it. So women say, they've learned that you teach people how to treat you.
I've heard that one.
Yeah. And so somehow that's the response. The woman's taught her abuser to abuse her. Wild ideas.
What a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's just a terrible idea.
Gross.
And Karen's talked about this in terms of, it's not Nathan who claims he's abusive and then she chooses it. But women have the idea, and I just heard it in another podcast I was listening to, that a woman has been taught to say, my picker is broken. In other words, who she picks in a relationship is broken. So she's broken. Again, we don't say, why did he manipulate reality to fool her or manipulate her into the relationship? We say, what's wrong with the way that you pick? It's a ridiculous idea. I can barely say it out loud again. Yeah. And so women's like, why do I always choose abusive men? My picker's broken.
Right.
It's like, well, that's not the problem.
Well, and we don't go, well, the fact that a woman may have had a number of relationships where she's been subject to abuse is actually because of the high number of men who engage in this behavior. But no, it's her picker.
Yeah. And to add to that, the high number of men who are abusive, but also the number of agencies and services that don't name the.
Yes.
So she doesn't get the right kind of support.
Right.
So she continues to operate in this dominant discourse. That makes her responsible.
I think that's such an important idea to name, Jo, because sometimes women have had more than one partner who's abusive. And so that, the whole society will tell her, well, obviously it's you, right?
Must be you,
And one of the ways I like to think about this is that if you got rear-ended 3 separate times, as actually happened to a friend of mine, in a fairly short period of time, we would not blame you for that, right? We would say, there are too many people who are distracted while they're driving, right? And they're running into people when they're stopped at a stoplight or whatever. And so to play it out a little bit more, it's like the woman is following the rules of the road. Like she actually knows how to do relationship, but then she's encountering somebody who is not following the rules of the road, right? Who is about power and control. But he presents himself as a relationship person, a relationship-oriented person in the beginning.
That's such a great analogy.
Or if you get cancer twice, nobody's right? Like,
you must be attracting those cancer cells.
You must be. Did you grow up with cancer in your family? What?
Yes.
And then there's other ideas, like you made your bed, so you lie in it. So we kind of trap women with some of the dominant discourses, or, if you stay for better or for worse, and you committed to that. And so there's other ways that trap women in the relationship as well.
Yeah. And sometimes women get accused of like loving too much or caring too much or trying too hard, right? Like, so there's no win for sure.
No, she can never win.
I always think of it this way, is that society has this idea about when women should leave, right? And she should leave certainly as soon as it's physically abusive.
Yeah.
But, before that, she should be trying to make it work. And then she should be out the next day. But the truth is, she's going to be judged either way. Because even if he is physically abusive, some people will say, oh, but he only did that once, right? And all of the other types of abuse that will have happened in the meantime, and all the ways she will have been entrapped by children in common, etc., right? So that women just get judged no matter what choices they're making.
And you keep coming back to the same thing, is we are always asking why her. And when are we going to start talking about him?
So it's just so important for us to examine and critique these beliefs, because how we talk about the problem shapes what language we use to talk about it, what we believe about it, how we're going to respond, and what we ignore, right? Like what as a society we ignore. And in a larger context, it influences what laws are created and enforced, which services get funded, who we sympathize with, and who we blame.
I want to ask the question then, how do we counter the dominant discourse and offer women and society at large a different narrative? Big question.
Yeah, it is an excellent question. And we've been working for decades in it. And honestly, I think things are worse today for women than they were 40 years ago when I started working in the women's shelter, because first of all, the assumption was that women were the primary caregiver in the relationship, and that they would
Of the children,
of the
right?
children,
Yeah.
and they would continue to be once they were separated. So society still carried the dominant discourse about maybe she was responsible for the problem, but we used good common sense back then to think, well, she was the primary caregiver and she will continue to be. So that was rarely disputed. Women were also financially, like at least in Canada, really quite well supported with income assistance, and housing wasn't in the crisis that it currently is in, I think, globally. And so women could afford decent housing that was affordable. They were given money to go back to school. We recognized that the impacts were significant, and so they were given childcare. And there was legal aid, which I think is so fundamental to all of this, because we know men use the court egregiously to continue with frivolous orders or like returns to court as a way of threatening women and kind of intimidating them, not because there's legitimate legal problems to be sorted out. And so women need lots of legal aid for that. And women were given that back then. So if we fast forward 40 years, patriarchy has really risen in its forcefulness. And the current political culture has emboldened this kind of like very patriarchal, woman-hating culture. Not everybody, but I think there's permission now to express that. And they've infiltrated the court systems. And so now the courts really do favor the abuser over the woman. And, when we think about patriarchy, it's embedded in faith institutions, in financial institutions, and in legal institutions. And so there's a platform that we call on to make laws, and those laws have always privileged men in general. And so abusive men are the ones who are willing to kind of invoke that privilege.
One thing that I think comes across here, and what we're trying to say, is both women and professionals need to have a strong understanding of the abuse and the dynamics of abuse and power and control to be able to help the women reframe their experience and the powerful messages that they are receiving. And it's imperative that a woman is believed 100% of the time.
Absolutely.
That should be the default always. To understand that abusers are responsible for the abuse and for stopping the abuse. Right?
Yeah.
What we're going to be talking about over the next number of episodes is tools, exercises, information that really directly challenge the dominant discourse. So, I think we're assuming as listeners have been listening, at times they've listened to us, give an example of a dominant discourse and thought, oh, well, I actually believe that. So we just want to encourage you to keep listening, because we're going to dismantle each of these dominant discourses and replace it with women's real lived experiences and the truth, and a much more accurate and helpful way to think about things and to talk about things.
I think, Karen, when you use the word truth, there's lots of truths out there. And really, when we talk about it, I'll just go back to the kind of foundation for us is the truth comes from women describing what's happened to them. Not why it happened, but what's happened. And because we hear the same thing over and over again for decades, we know that to be true. And I think that's where we feel like we're so solid. A case study of one, it's like somebody will say to me, well, I have a client and for sure it's the man that's being abused. I'm like, well, that's a case study of one. That's not this huge global epidemic. And they're probably not listening carefully enough either. But we know this is true because it's true for women that we've worked with, thousands of women probably in our work lives, between all of us.
Yeah, we must be diligent in our efforts to stand up to these beliefs on behalf of women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and beyond all else, we must strive to have a truly human, caring approach and develop meaningful responses with the women that we're supporting and for the women listening to this.
Yeah, and I think that's, to the question, how do we dismantle this? We try to insert the truth, and we invite listeners to listen and put your own experience in and find your own truth in all of this.
Well, that is it for today. We'll leave you with that. A hope that this has been helpful for you. If you want more information, please come to our website, the www.whenlovehurts.ca.
Yeah.
.ca. And we will have more information there. We have lots, Jill and Karen have put up lots of blog posts, and there's lots of information you can access, and you can access more about the podcast. As always, please like, share, and subscribe so that more people can access this content. And we want to say a big thank you to MCC Canada. This season was supported by the generosity of MCC Canada. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, we are looking for a sponsor for next season. So if this is something that might interest you, please contact us through the website again at whenlovehurts.ca. Thank you again.